Hello there guys, hope you're doing really well. I wanted to do a show predominantly about Chelsea's potential or likely now new striker. It is believed that Chelsea are in the process of making a transfer complete for Atletico Madrid forward Samu Omorodion. And this has been a name that's been linked to Chelsea pretty much all summer, and a lot of things have happened quite quickly involving Chelsea and Atletico Madrid from a transfer point of view. Specifically, the dominoes kind of falling, especially with Alvarez moving from Man City to Atletico in a massive deal. It is believed that once that is completed, Omorodion could be making his way to Stamford Bridge. So with that in mind, I wanted to take a look at this forward because Chelsea fans have wanted to see Chelsea sign a striker this year, and whether this is the answer, or is it more potential for the future? Is it a player that actually may struggle within already a cluttered squad, and especially with what Enzo Maresca is going to be demanding from his players this season? So we're going to go into all of that. I think a general overview of Samu, as we're calling him, because that's the name on the back of his shirt and probably will be at Chelsea, is numbers from last season. So he was signed from by Atletico Madrid last summer and basically instantly sent out on loan. This is something that Chelsea do pretty regularly. But he was sent on loan to Alaves, kind of a mid-table club. And the numbers sort of reference with La Liga strikers under 21 makes it very positive sort of looking for him from last season. So he was top for non-penalty goals, XG, assists, headed goals, goals conversion, touches in the opponent's box, dribbles and offensive duels won. But we need to dig a little bit deeper. That's kind of an overview. What is it that makes Samu such an effective centre forward, and why many people who speak about him very glowingly believe he could turn out to be a major striker, not only at club level but also international level, as he's already played for the youth ranks at Spanish international football. So breaking the lines, which I think is just generally an amazing source for info around football and especially scouting. On this show, I remember doing one for Edouard Mendy years ago, especially for players that aren't kind of the biggest names. It's a really great resource, so I definitely suggest go and not only read this piece about Samu Omorodion, but also others they do. And of course, with Chelsea signing players that aren't that well known, I think obviously makes them an even greater resource in very recent times. So this is what they had said about the player. More than 80% of Samu's shots have come from within the opposition penalty box. Almost 50% of them have been on target. Samu has made an attempt on goal from almost everywhere in the 18-yard box. And there is a graph here that I'll put up on screen if you're listening on the podcast. It effectively looks at that 6-yard box, and there's little coloured dots that, you know, specify a goal, off target, on target, or shot hitting the post basically. And then also references kind of the XG value of all of them. And it shows how varied and how wide his ability in the box is, but it shows you he predominantly is much more of a classic centre forward. In terms of profile, there are things about his game overall that I do think is impressive in terms of build-up, in terms of his physicality, being able to hold up the ball, playing others of his teammates. But I think predominantly this is very much a centre forward. This is very much a classic number 9. This is someone who is going to be playing in the 6-yard box, is going to be more of a focal point than any other player Chelsea have signed in recent times. This is not an Nkunku. This is not a Cole Palmer. This is not a fluid kind of forward of the modern age, at least at this point in his development. So you really are looking at someone that you're going to be focusing on as a centre forward. Is going to be someone you're looking to service inside the 6-yard box, because that's where he does his work. They go on to say he has a good shooting technique and is very decisive in taking his attempt. There have been moments when Samu has slightly been off control and double-minded when making the attempt on goal, but with time, experience and discipline, he can become a lethal finisher of the game. I also think another thing they pick out on here, and they show screenshots of him inside the 6-yard box, kind of creating separation from his marker and then being able to get a run kind of near post from his defender. And I think that's a very smart kind of movement of Samu that I do think is very encouraging early in his career. It seems like he very much almost awakens inside the 6-yard box. Again, there are some screenshots we'll look at that show outside the box he can do good work, good build up as well. But it does feel like whenever he senses there is an opportunity there, he's hungry, he's confident, he's going to get across his marker, he's going to try and find that space. And even if the technique and the end product isn't as refined as it probably could be at this point, but he still is a very young player with not, tons of senior minutes. It is encouraging that he at least has that instinct and seems already to appreciate that, because some young players might have that, but then they may lose confidence or they may just never have it. It's kind of one of those, it feels like in football, quite unteachable things that great strikers have, and that's good to see from a young age. But it also picks up on this breaking the lines piece, that he can keep himself in position to play one-touch passes or to find more space by stretching out the field of play, and he can also position himself the right way to reach for through passes by breaking the lines of the defensive team. Him being an absolute beast in pouncing on the loose balls to initiate counter-attacks or keep hold of the ball until finding his teammate in a better position to keep the play moving, but he has to work on his final balls during build-up, and there is a very specific sequence of play that we're going to look at a little bit later that shows this, that the first part can be really good from Samu, but kind of that end product, which I think as a young player, again, can be raw, can be erratic, needs to be worked upon, but again, promising. The only thing they really do criticise, apart from his finishing that needs to be better, is his defensive work. Occasionally, not only is his decision-making poor, but just when he loses the ball, he possesses little interest to win it back and making it hard for his team defensively. And this is kind of signalled and showcased in a defensive contribution graph that takes data from FBref that kind of shows in terms of blocks and aerials won. Not incredible. It's something that he's going to need to work upon. I guess, at a different level, maybe your argument is with Chelsea, who are going to be a more ball-dominant team, better than Alaves, that maybe this won't be as big of a problem, but especially in bigger games when Chelsea don't have a lot of the ball, and because Alaves are kind of a mid-table team, they're not one of the biggest Spanish teams, they deal with counter-attacking, they deal with not having the ball. So this is something clearly he needs to work upon. I think the biggest thing for him from FBref, just looking at kind of a general overview of his scouting report, is non-penalty XG puts him in the 85th percentile. Nothing there kind of stands out. And when you look at his general numbers last season, he played 35 games, La Liga, 34 appearances, 8 goals in total in La Liga. So not exactly outstanding. Nothing that, you really think, wow, this is an absolute star in the making. But there are things that, as we're going to get into, I think do make some sense or logic that maybe this guy could turn out to be a lot better very quickly if given the right development at a big club like Chelsea. I wanted to compare him as well with the current Chelsea forwards that we've got. I did include David Dacha Fofana, who of course his future feels very up in the air at the moment at Chelsea, but I just wanted to include him because, of course, he did play for Union Berlin last year in the Bundesliga. He played on loan at Burnley, so he did have experience in top 5 leagues, so I think it was relevant to put him in here. Of course, Nicholas Jackson and Mark Guillou as well were on this list, and Mark Guillou stands out for goals per 90. He really struggles, Samu, in terms of successful dribbles. But in terms of other things like shots on target that we've already discussed, shots per 90, goals per 90, especially goals per 90, in terms of him and Jackson, I mean, there's not a radical difference. I think there are positives here, absolutely, with Samu in terms of looking at the numbers, looking at what people say about him, and feeling there are more positives than negatives. Now I want to get into specific moments within the game, and then right at the end we'll talk about pros and cons for this potential signing. One of the things I love about him is he's a bit of a chaos merchant, and he uses his physicality already at a young age to a really good ability. He has a knowledge that he can overpower a lot of centre-backs, and especially when you're moving potentially to the Premier League that is known for its physicality, whereas a centre-forward, you're going to be treated in that way, and you need to kind of confront that. That's something that Jackson had to deal with as the season went on and got better. I think the fact that Samu already has this in his kind of skill set is something that's very, very encouraging, especially when he gets down the flank or when he's confronted by several defenders. It feels like he very much backs himself to shrug off someone, and usually he does. And even if that does make him look a little bit erratic, I think his balance as well is actually pretty good for a guy of his size. He sometimes looks like he's losing his footing and could lose the ball and maybe have a loose touch, but it feels like he very much is using that to its full ability to kind of very much turbocharge attacks where it feels like he's maybe a little bit outnumbered. Another thing, in tight areas gives me a little bit of promise here. I think with his back to goal, he doesn't look that uncomfortable with his back to goal, which I think is quite important if we're talking about low blocks and Chelsea and having to kind of be a little bit of a batting ram, but also someone to play off, I think is very important for a centre forward at Chelsea. When I'm looking at players like Nkunku, Palmer and others who are probably going to want to play around a centre forward like Jackson, like Samu, and whether he can do that. So really good ability here to shield off again, pressure from a defender at a young age, but then also shrug the players off, but kind of take it around to several players, but then keep moving forward. And this is where his inability maybe with a final ball needs to be improved, because he does so much great work here from a tight space. He's going to play in a teammate for a one-on-one chance, but the pass as he kind of expresses with frustration after, is overhit and the chance is gone. But I guess, potential-wise, this is what Chelsea and others would be looking at and going, if you can refine that, there's a lot here to like and could really elevate this player to another level. Another example here of on the flank, again, I like seeing a centre-forward that not only can play in the 6-yard box, but also has the confidence to go on the channels and very much go up against opposing defenders, shrugging them off, getting himself into a central area, but then not really having an ability to shoot. He kind of takes it onto his right foot and bends a really nice ball to the back post for one of his teammates that nearly does lead to a goal. It was a nice save in the end, but signs of a creative spark to Samu that isn't really being shown up at the moment in terms of data, but I think definitely again is a part of his game that you think over time, if given the right development, could become an even better part and make him a more rounded centre forward. I think this is very encouraging. But another thing you'll hear about Samu when you're reading about him or listening to people who speak about him is counter-attacking. When Alaves were able to counter-attack, this is one of the biggest strengths of Samu, being able to hold up the ball, start counter-attacks, sort of instigate, being able to confront the defenders, shrug them off already with his power, but then very much, when that ball gets into the 6-yard box, especially aerially, he can be very dominant. And I thought this was such a great goal. Fun enough, against Villarreal. Ironically, the team Chelsea bought a striker from last year who was quite raw in Nicholas Jackson, but also the goalkeeper in this situation is now a Chelsea player in Philip Jorgensen. And we see here just brilliant shielding back to goal, lays it off to his teammate, and then darting to the back post. The ball gets played. It's a good ball, but he still has some work to do to kind of place that header towards the far post, and he does so brilliantly. And it just shows his aggression. Another brilliant header against Barcelona. He actually scored twice against Barcelona last year, and both finishes were first time, both crosses into the box. So they very much serviced him, Alaves, as a centre-forward in kind of the best way possible, which is really positive to see. And another example here of a counter-attack where starts it himself, uses good balance to kind of keep himself on his feet. Not the greatest touch. He does get a little bit lucky with a ricochet, but then played in one-on-one and then has the composure to finish the chance. And another example here, more so classic centre-forward play, sitting in the 6-yard box, waiting for that ball to come, being patient, and when it did, even in a tight area, being able to finish clinically. I'm trying not to get carried away with Samu, because at least some of the people I respect who've talked about him have referred to a certain centre forward that I love, that's in the frame of this video right now, that I talk about on a regular basis, and I can understand why, given some of the things he does. That's very high praise, and of course it looked like Armando Broja looked like a little bit of that player a few years ago. So obviously there's a lot of variables here. I think the positive about him is firstly physical profile. I don't think he's going to have a problem walking into the Premier League and being confronted by a physical profile and a physicality that he's never had to deal with. Yes, La Liga isn't as physical as the Premier League, but I think just in terms of his build, just in terms of the way he uses his body, I think he naturally could fit in the Premier League, and I think could give some aerial prowess, aerial dominance that Chelsea actually have been lacking. And maybe that's where, from a defensive point of view, he needs to improve, because if he can improve defensively, as we've seen with Costa and Drogba, some of the best Chelsea centre forwards, yes, we're mainly talking about what they're doing in attack, but defensively from set pieces they can be a real asset as well, using that physicality, ability to work in tight areas. Even though he does look a little bit unorthodox, I think that's a positive of his game too. Overpowering, instinctive finishing. I think these are all things you see a variety of finishes from him that hopefully could only get better over time. He seems to, come alive, and he senses and smells danger, and he knows where goals are. And as I say, even if he isn't always finishing those chances, I think that instinct is, like with Jackson, I think is a real positive. I think the cons is, of course, raw ability. And this is one of my concerns with Samu, is that, it's kind of like buying Jackson again, and he's not going to probably get the same leeway or patience, or even kind of the time that Jackson was given, and whether it's going to become a little bit cluttered for him. I do think the Conference League is a great place for a player like Samu to probably play regularly, but of course it's easy to forget that Chelsea signed Marc Guiu from Barcelona, another player that is going to need minutes to develop. So when you've got still kind of three centre forwards potentially, if you take out David Dacha Fofana, who is likely to be leaving on loan or permanently, all three of these players need minutes. And of course Chelsea have a lot of games, injuries, form, there's going to be rotation. I think this is a guy that obviously needs more seasoning, and it's just making sure that he's going to get that at Chelsea. It's not that he couldn't be a bit of a chaos merchant and a nice alternative to Jackson, maybe off the bench. I just think for his own development, given what he got at Alaves last year, it would kind of be a bit of a regression for him if he turns up at Chelsea and finds himself as a bit of a fringe player. But there's clearly going to be a lot of games, so I think he would get opportunities and maybe could actually boost himself to a level that many people don't expect and actually become more of a starter, especially if he's deemed a player that's useful for Maresca to work and elevate players around him. I think the only other concern is style of football. It's not that I think technically he's the most dreadful player I've seen. I actually think there's a lot about him that I like. As I say, a bit of a chaos merchant, someone who is a little bit unorthodox. I think that's what Jackson has, but he proved to be very effective. It's just the style of football Maresca is playing and what he demands of a centre-forward, really to drop deep and at times almost get behind the midfielders if Chelsea decides to play with 2-8s. And also playing in a team that isn't going to be playing as much counter-attacking football as he was used to, and maybe a little bit more, as I say, positional, a little bit more rigid, dare I say. Can he adapt to that? There's a funny thing that, Man City, Pep Guardiola, for all his style of play, they now have a big number 9 up top and are winning big trophies because of it. And I think there are just kind of standard general football things that will always be relevant. And having a big number 9 is probably, or just an effective number 9, I think is always one of them. So Samu is someone that's going to need time, going to need patience. And I think he's someone that absolutely I could see with the right environment. Is that Chelsea or not? We're not entirely sure. Could really explode and become a much bigger player and become someone with his attributes that remind me of certain other centre forwards that I won't name simply because it's kind of unfair on a player to I always almost think naming Diego earlier is kind of unfair to him, but players that I've seen before with these kind of attributes that can become very dominant. So there's a lot there to work with. It would then be on Enzo Maresca, of course, to work with that and improve that, and of course the player to reach his potential at Chelsea. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Are you positive or negative about this deal? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.